For the last 3 years, inflation has been roiling this market both all our lives and causing so many problems in our daily lives. And today I'm going to talk about why I think that you should be looking at these top 10 assets by market cap to see where exactly you can protect yourself against this inflation. Now, I was talking to a friend the other day and we were talking about how prices are just out of control, even though the government has said that prices are going down. In reality, prices are just kind of hanging tight because our salaries are not going up. So if you take a look at gold, gold is actually still at $2,000. Now, a lot of people think that gold is a good investment. I personally don't think it is because you can't really do anything with it. Gold market cap is $13.8 trillion. And you can't really eat it. It doesn't earn yield, doesn't do anything. You just kind of look at it. It's a good hedge against inflation during certain periods of time, but gold has historically underperformed inflation by quite a bit. Now that brings us to Apple at $2.9 trillion, which has done very well against inflation, actually. If you take a look at Apple's historical returns over time, it has pretty much gone. If you take a look at the last, let's pick 10 years, okay? Change 43%, 28, 25. This beats inflation by a long shot. So anybody who bought Apple 10 years ago in 2013, you literally did very well against inflation. And that's what today's topic is really about is, are you beating inflation? Because if you're not beating inflation, there's no point in putting money in this. Now, the other one's Microsoft. Microsoft, same idea. Let's take a look at Microsoft's $2.7 trillion market cap since 2013, and it's done also much higher than inflation. In fact, had you bought Microsoft in 2013 at 300 billion, you would have had almost an 8x return on your money in just that time period by just buying a company that is at 310 billion, which some people would think that is actually a lot of money, but in reality, it just got better, and better. Now, another one also is going to be, I'm going to skip Saudi Aramco, but Saudi Aramco has, if you were able to buy Saudi Aramco, it's a little different because this one just IPO'd, so I'm not going to go through this one, but it's pretty much unless you got into Saudi Aramco before IPO and you had an equity stake, then you did well. But let's look at Apple. Apple is a great example. I mean, Google. Google here is a great example of another company, another compounder. Now, with the exception of 2022, where it lost like half its value, it's since recovered, quite substantially. So it was at 1.1 trillion. So it went from 1.9 to 1.1 trillion, and it's recovered quite a bit of it. Not exactly all of it if you bought in 2021, but if you bought it in 2013, you are still up more than 4 or 5x your money. So it depends really when you got in, obviously, and especially if you're buying here at the top in 2021 when everything's pumping and pumping and pumping, then obviously that's probably not the best time to get in. But right now we're looking at a $1.6 trillion market cap from this, and so handily beating inflation hand over fist. Now let's take a look at something like Amazon. Amazon's another example, right? Amazon has done fantastic since 2013. In fact, Amazon was at $183 billion and is close to a 10x. Okay, let me repeat that one more time. Amazon is now at a $1.5 trillion market cap when in 10 years ago, which is generally, and let's to be fair, we don't really know 10 years, but let's go back 5 years. In 2018, Amazon has already doubled up 5 years ago. So if you go ahead and do the math, that's about 20% per year for Amazon. Even had you invested during the COVID period at the top, you'd still be down by just, a couple of, not that much, right? Because it's recovered quite a bit of it. So the point I'm trying to make with all of this, guys, is that you want to find investments that are always beating inflation, right? Inflation is running between 2% back then, but let's assume the Fed is running at about 5% inflation or 10%. You still would have to beat that, which here you automatically beat by a long shot. So that's not problematic. Now, also want to mention is something like NVIDIA. NVIDIA had a really great year. And the one thing I always sell with NVIDIA is like, if you take a look again, 5 years ago, 5 or 10 years ago, let's take a look at 2018, NVIDIA was at $81 billion. Now, this is very interesting because now it's a 1.1 trillion. So in just a span of 5 years, NVIDIA had almost Wow, I mean, this one is almost 10x. I mean, that's mind-boggling, right? In 5 years, 10x. In 10 years ago, Nvidia did from 9 billions to 1.1 trillion, right? Is that right? So if you take a look at this, we're talking about almost 100x return on your money in just 10 years. That's phenomenal growth, right? This is probably one of the best investments you would have made 10 years ago. Okay, even Facebook did that. So Facebook 5 years ago, okay, in 2018 was 300, maybe not as much as the other ones, but in 2013 it was only 139. So this company basically did really well, even with the drawdowns. I mean, it went down to 319. It's recovered almost all of it. It went down in 2018 by 27%, and it recovered almost all of it the next year. So these companies are fairly resilient, and it just shows you the power of these companies and how important it is to hold on to the long term. Now, let me show you Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is actually, well, Bitcoin's actually not, for some reason, it doesn't let me pick on that one. But let me show you here. If we do have, let's take a look at, yeah, for some reason it's not allowing me to click on Bitcoin, but maybe if I go ahead and do this, okay, it should let me. Right, so if I take a look, actually, it doesn't do it because it's probably a stock, so it's not a stock. But Bitcoin has actually done a lot better in terms of price action. And so I'll pull something else here. But to show you right now, the top 10 next to Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway is really interesting because this is a company that in 5 years ago was 500. So it hasn't really done much, only about a 50% run. And if you go back to here, back to 2013, Berkshire has only doubled. So this one is actually not that great. You might as well just buy the S&P for that. But Tesla is another one that has done phenomenally well since 2018, 57 to now. That's a 10x from 2013 at 18 billion to 759. That's really, really good. That's really a high growth company. Now, the point I'm trying to make is if you take a look at the top 10, I'm pretty sure 5 years ago, these were also the top 10, right? With the exception of obviously like Berkshire Hathaway and Saudi Aramco, which I think is a little different story. But if you take a look at it, Bitcoin's right there. And the S&P, which is very interesting, has pretty much, it's starting at 421, but the gains for the S&P are actually a lot lower than some of the compounding rates that we have with Bitcoin. And so what you want to do is you want to look for those compounders. Those are the ones that are compounding at a very high rate. Now, the question is, can these continue to compound at this phenomenal rate? That's the ultimate secret. But really, when it comes down to it, it's really those top 10. And then if you take a look at your next list of your next top 10, which of these companies are actually growing that fast? And the answer is, we're not going to get Eli Lilly growing that fast. Same thing with United Healthcare. These companies are not going to be at they may double up in the next 5 years, but it's going to be a slow double up because the companies are really well established at this point, and the growth rates are going to be a lot slower just because they're so large. But, if you take a look at things like Amazon and Google, Microsoft, Apple, right? Those are tech companies, are constantly innovating. The trend here is usually tech is going to do it, and Bitcoin is right there at number 11. So I don't think Bitcoin is going to be any different. I think that it's an asset class on its own that it can hang with these magnificent seven. So Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Meta, and Nvidia. And so this is going to be one of those situations where we kind of get those cases. And another one that I really think it's going to do very well is going to be Ethereum, because Ethereum has historically done extremely well relative to Bitcoin's price. Now, right now it's at 259 billion. I couldn't imagine a day when Ethereum could be 4 or 5 times at $1 trillion. Now, Bitcoin right now is sitting at $771 billion. And if we take a look at how much can Bitcoin get to, can it get to like Apple's valuation? I think it can. I think it can, because if you think about it for a second, Berkshire Hathaway is 776 billion, but it's not growing as quickly as Bitcoin just because of the fact that it's a conglomerate, right? Bitcoin is different from all of these top 10. Same thing with Amazon and Apple and Google. These are all tech companies. And so when we're talking about like how high can Bitcoin go, if you take a look at Microsoft when it was at $700 billion, right? And this was back in 2018. it went up to 2.7 trillion even during the pandemic. And so that's about a 3x, a 4x on your money. 3x probably more three between 3 to 4x your money. And so if that's the case, then Bitcoin should be at $100,000, right? Now, another thing also I want to mention is that Bitcoin, it has limited supply. Many of these companies can issue out stock anytime they want. They have to continuously grow their company. They have to be growing at a very, very high rate for them to sustain that valuation. Bitcoin has one thing going for it, a couple of things going for it. Number one, it's you can't print make more. Number one. Number two is the amount of coins available is paltry compared to what these stocks have. And so just to give you an idea, right, if we take a look at Apple, how many shares of Apple do we have? And so let me go ahead and just go ahead and put this in for Apple. Apple actually has, if we go back to the number of shares, Apple has 15 billion shares out there. Now obviously they're buying those shares, but their float is pretty high. I mean, they have 15.4 billion dollars worth of shares. Now, if you take a look at Microsoft, Microsoft has 7 billion shares available. So that's a lot. That's a ton of stock out there that they're actually building. Meta has also quite a bit. I mean, these are 2 billion, maybe not as much as the other two, but what they're doing is that you have people buying and dumping and selling those shares, 2 billion shares on average. Now, how much does Bitcoin have? 20 million. Right? So Bitcoin has only 20 million coins out there. Okay, let me just repeat that one more time. If you take a look at the circulating supply of Bitcoin, that's going to be 19.5 million Bitcoins. That's all in existence. That's all you're ever going to have. And so when people are thinking about this in terms of 2 billion shares versus 20 million, right? And the market cap is sitting at 770 million and you can't make more of it. The laws of supply and demand just basically tell you that, that $700 billion market cap is probably not going to go any lower because let's take a look at who the Bitcoin holders are. Top Bitcoin holders in the world. And the way we're going to read this is we're going to read this to double check what the circulating supply is. And what we see is there are going to be a lot of wallets that are holding, but institutions, right? If we take a look at the institutions hold, MicroStrategy holds 158,000 Bitcoins, which is out of that 20 million, obviously is not a lot. But if you take a look at where the holders are, a lot of these wallets, a lot of these top 10 wallets generally are holding a lot of those coins, and most of these are anonymous, which is interesting. But Binance holds quite a big chunk of those. But let me just go ahead and give you a better one. These countries and these holders, if we take a look at the big holders, the U.S. government has quite a bit. 205,000. Block One has 164,000. MicroStrategy has 140, and so on. And by the way, MicroStrategy is still increasing their holdings. But even if you add up all of these, you're not even coming close to that 20 million. So that 20 million, that's whatever's available, is most likely going to come on the market. But these companies are swallowing it all up. And so MicroStrategy obviously is the largest one. But the one thing I want to say, right, is that if you take a look at how many coins are out there, it's really, that's just the ones we do know that most likely will be purchased from BlackRock and some of these other exchanges. But Bitcoin's market cap is at 769 million. And if we take a look at the current market cap of that, and let's assume Bitcoin does go down, the fact that the supply is already fixed is actually very, very interesting to me, right? For gold, it's only 205,000 metric tons, but gold can always be produced and mined. And so that's the one thing that I always say, that if you take a look at gold at 13 trillion, I think that Bitcoin can potentially get to gold's market cap, which at this point, if you kind of think about it for a second, at 770 billion to 13, that's a little bit more than a 14x return, assuming it gets to gold's level. which personally I think it will, just because gold compared to Bitcoin are these are both commodities. The only difference is that gold you can actually manufacture, you can actually get more of if you dig it in. And the second thing is that gold is you can't really carry it with you all the time. With Bitcoin, you could potentially carry it with you. You can transact with it. You can chop it up into little pieces. You can use different denominations for it. So, at the end of the day, this is just basically the bare minimum. The 3 trillion that you see for Apple, the 2.7 trillion that you see for Microsoft, that's just the floor. And right now we're underneath that floor because for the macro reasons and for whatever reason that we're talking about. So moving forward, I'll be DCing my way into Bitcoin to get to that $13.8 trillion market cap. That is going to be the holy grail of where Bitcoin could potentially be valued at. And again, that's going to be perhaps maybe a little over estimating Bitcoin's price, but at a 10x price point, we're looking at $400,000-$500,000 Bitcoin, which to me, it's not within the realm of it's still within the realm of possibility in the future. Obviously, it's going to take a little longer to do that since it's such a much larger market cap, but there's a very high chance that we'll get that in the next 5 to 10 years. Okay. Now, I do want to mention a couple of things. These companies at one point, nobody thought they can crack 1 trillion. In fact, when they cracked 1 trillion, everybody was kind of shocked that they did. We did this huge celebration with it. And nobody thought that in 10, 15 years ago that these companies were going to be worth this much. And at that time, everybody thought that tech was going to just go in the dumpster bin because of what happened in the dot-com bubble. And this anchoring bias that we have at the moment was brought in by the financial recession that we had in 08, the tech crash in 2000, which a lot of people still remember, by the way. And now they're starting to see that, hey, maybe we should not have sold these companies. And sure enough, this is actually the few that survived. And that's why I think that many of the altcoins are probably not going to do as well as Bitcoin, just because of the fact that relative to where Bitcoin was several years ago, and where is it right now? I mean, Bitcoin was Bitcoin hit almost $1 trillion, right? So if you really think about it, at its peak at $70,000, Bitcoin was already at $1 trillion. So that to me is very interesting, right? That to me is very interesting. So I think there is going to be a lot of possibilities for Bitcoin. I also think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity, and probably now is the time to get in. All right, see you guys.